Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter.
One of the links with the Bruges of the old days, when Bruges was a port and 150 vessels a day came into its waters. Well, they've got another port now at Zeebrugge, further upstream, and who was that?
In the entire time that we've been exposed to the world of television, one thing has remained a constant: the ever-evolving door of familiar faces that greet us on our screens. Whether they present the news, front live entertainment programmes, or everything in between, no matter when you grew up, I bet you can recall and name at least one TV presenter of some kind. For those growing up in the 60s, 70s and 80s, that name may very well be Frank Bough. At one time, he was arguably the most prolific name and face that audiences would see when they tuned into the BBC. But then, towards the end of the 80s, he seemingly vanished. No great fanfare, no staggered departure. One day he was there, the next he was gone.
Where the hell's Frank?
Today we'll explore the life, the career, and the downfall of Frank Bough.
Detmold, Western Germany, the home of the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, British Army of the Rhine.
Born in 1933, Frank Bough would get his first taste of broadcasting during his national service. Stationed in West Germany, a football game between two regiments took place. In need of a commentator for British Forces Radio, keen football fan and player Bough took to the microphone. After his time in the army, during the early 60s, Bough joined the BBC, which was, at that time, about to enter a golden age of programming and broadcasting. Frank would helm a show based around Newcastle upon Tyne, originally called Home at 6. It soon became known as North at 6, and then finally changed its name to one that is still in use today, Look North. In 1964, Frank would become the presenter of Sports View, a role he would hold for 4 years. During this time, he became more and more recognisable, familiar, and appreciated by the viewers who tuned in. The next progression in Frank's career would be his biggest yet, when he became the regular host of Grandstand. This was the BBC's leading sports programme, airing on Saturday afternoons. It's fair to say, particularly at this time in the 1960s, that Grandstand was one of the BBC's most popular and most viewed programmes. So for Frank to helm this show, a live show at that, where anything could go wrong, was both quite the honour and challenge. Relishing the role, Frank would lead Grandstand for an impressive 15 years, finally stepping away in 1983. His reason for leaving the role? We'll touch on that a little bit later. Frank continued his sporting host roles, including being one of the BBC's commentators during the 1966 World Cup. The most notable match he covered involved North Korea defeating Italy 1-0, which was just as shocking to learn now as I'm sure it was back in 1966. As the 1970s began, it was yet another exciting time for the world of television. Colour had been launched in 1967, but only had become available on all 3 channels during the final months of 1969. Technological achievements aside, a whole new generation of iconic programming was being churned out.
This is BBC One. Now, Michael Barrett introduces the first edition of a new programme, Nationwide.
For Frank, he joined the BBC's latest magazine-style programme, Nationwide, becoming a host in 1972. If viewers weren't familiar with him from Grandstand, then Nationwide definitely filled that gap. The programme was incredibly popular, and Frank's 10-year stint as host cemented his visibility and familiarity with the British public. His laid-back, casual, yet professional style of presenting was praised by many. He could deliver serious news with the same level of respect that every trained BBC newsreader could muster, but also find time to have a laugh, both with his co-hosts and his many guests.
But you have to be Doctor Who all the time, I'm told. People regard you totally where they see you as Doctor Who and nothing else. Do you
Well, I mean, I don't have to be Doctor Who any more than you have to be Frank Bough.
Yes, but I am Frank Bough.
Oh, no, I know you are. I'm Doctor Who because I only have a fictional image.
He was definitely a BBC man, but one you felt you could connect with on a deeper level than just recognising his face and voice. That more jovial side could be seen in full force at Christmas time. For Frank, alongside many of his fellow presenters, would appear on the Morecambe and Wise Christmas special for 1977. Dressed as sporting sailors, Bough, together with other well-known faces such as Michael Aspel, Barry Norman and Eddie Waring, performed a song and dance routine to There's Nothing Like a Dame from the classic musical South Pacific. It's said that Frank would give lessons to some of his colleagues in anticipation of filming the number, a professional to the last. What resulted is a humorous and good-natured skit, part of a special that pulled in over 21 million viewers. one of the most watched programmes of all time. Rounding off 1977 by winning the Richard Dimbleby Award for Outstanding Contribution to Factual Television, it's fair to say that Frank was on top of the televisual world. He was well known and loved by millions of people up and down the country, and had cemented himself as a key part of the BBC's presenting team. As the 1980s drew nearer, there was nothing to suggest that Frank's career would falter, and that his presence and reputation would only continue to go stronger and stronger.
Frank Bough is part of the language. He's become a cult figure. He's become a hero almost, and we have a fan club, the Frank Bough fan club, named after him, basically because we feel that he's an absolutely marvellous presenter.
Well, Frank, they really were a marvellous bunch of people at the Abu Dhabi Outward Bound Centre. They want to see you one day. You've never been there, of course.
This programme has suddenly taken a course I know absolutely nothing about.
This is BBC One. In a few moments, it'll be breakfast time.
Just as colour had been an exciting evolution of television in the 1970s, the 80s brought many exciting developments of their own. One of them was the introduction of breakfast television. It may seem mundane these days, but back then, television starting at 6 AM in the morning was a brand new prospect here in the UK. Both the BBC and ITV were racing to be first out of the gate, hoping to sweep up and keep the majority of the audience who would naturally tune in to this new type of TV. With many years in the build-up to get to this point, both the timing of the launch and the style that both sides wanted to convey would be essential to win over the British public. TVAM would launch for ITV on the 1st of February 1983, and to most viewers' surprise, came across rather dull, drab, and oh so serious. Traits that many would have expected from the dear old BBC. ITV and the minds of TVAM had clearly thought the same, and although not as familiar to them, adapted this approach in an effort to compete. However, 2 weeks earlier, viewers had already got a taste of the BBC's breakfast offerings, launching ahead of TVAM, leading with a style that no one really expected from the corporation. The early morning service for the BBC would be aptly named Breakfast Time. And who would be the first face of this landmark moment? Frank Bough, of course.
It's 6:30, Monday, January the 17th, 1983. You're watching the first edition of BBC Television's Breakfast Time, Britain's first ever regular early morning television programme. Very good morning to you all. Now, from now on, 5 days a week, from 6:30 till 9, we hope to be present at your breakfast table to bring you the morning's news, weather, sport, traffic, but we also plan to put an awful lot more into our breakfast menu. Regular features, regional news, live reports from all over the country. Now, as you can see, our home is very, very relaxed and informal, and we really do think that that is the right setting from which to bring you interviews with people and personalities who are making the day's news. Now then, let me tell you just one important thing. Time, at this time of the morning, for the next 2 or 3 hours, is of the essence to all of us. So we need our clock. Here is our clock. That's the time, and there it will stay.
It's hardly a no-brainer that one of the top men at the BBC for the time would be one of the leading hosts. Not only was this new ground for British television generally, but the operation was also carried out live. Live programming is no easy beast, and that fact has not changed all that much over the generations. But for Frank, by this time in broadcasting for 20 years, felt just as comfortable with fronting a live programme as he had done anything else. Given that Grandstand was a weekly live show too, one that Frank helmed for many years, he was all but a shoo-in when Breakfast Time was being pieced together. One of his co-presenters, Nick Ross, had warm words to say about Frank when recalling his presence on the show. None of us had remotely the experience of long, unscripted slabs of live TV that Frank had from his sports broadcasting. He brought a sense of serenity and reassurance. His unruffled composure made us feel this had all been done before. And on that first morning, as the last minutes ticked down to our opening transmission, when hearts were thumping and nerves were jangling, he clapped his hands and, addressing the producers and the technicians as much as Selina and me, gently and firmly said, "Calm down." We did. Whilst these comments from Nick Ross are positive and good-natured, the main female presenter of early Breakfast Time, Selina Scott, had only the opposite to say when talking about Frank. She claimed that he undermined her frequently, both on air and behind the scenes. Quite rightly, Selina tried to take her views of Frank's behaviour to senior management, who she alleges were, quite simply, not interested, both in her complaints or notifying Frank that he needed to do better. Her unheard comments only further frustrated Selina. She would later say of senior management, They seemed to have no emotional intelligence, and they let men like Frank Bough roam the BBC without any check on them. History has since informed us that sadly, Selina would be one of many staff members at the BBC who felt this way. This atmosphere of male dominance, an attitude of power that they could get away with anything and everything, from undermining others as Selina alleges Frank did, to much more serious offences, for example the various sexual crimes committed by Jimmy Savile, also another one of the BBC's top presenters at that time.
We hope very much you like what you see and choose to make a habit of spending breakfast time with us on BBC One.
Breakfast time proved popular from the off, and it took TVAM quite some time to both match and eventually eclipse its popularity. Part of the success was attributed to the laid-back, casual yet professional chemistry between the three main hosts, with Bough in particular often singled out, likely due to his wealth of previous experience in live TV. But presenter lineups change all the time, and one such newcomer would be Fern Britton. A well-known name around the country today, back then she was one of the youngest presenters of national news on the BBC. Despite this exciting accolade, she too had her issues with Frank. Decades later, within her autobiography, she claimed that Frank had said the following to her: "Well, young lady, I wonder how long it will be before I'm having an affair with you." Some may brush this off as a light-hearted, if poorly thought-out joke, though I think it's important to remember a few things. During the mid-80s, Fern would have been in her mid-20s, compared to Frank, who was well into his 50s. Also, Fern was still a relative newcomer to the BBC, and despite it being a positive achievement in her appointment to breakfast time, you can imagine the potential nerves and pressure that she would have been under. So, to have the top male presenter at the Beeb make that sort of comment your way may have been rather unsettling. Even more so when allegedly, once again according to Fern, Frank would openly dismiss her and her thoughts and ideas during pre-programme briefings. Again, to be cast aside so openly by such a power and presence must have been earth-shattering for the newcomer. But despite all of these reported issues with various female co-stars, Frank's profile on telly and his workload for the medium continued just as smoothly as it ever had. By this point, he'd been on the BBC in some shape or form for a quarter of a century. An elder statesman known by generations of viewers, whether it was a child, their parents, or their grandparents, it's fair to say that by the time Frank Bough left breakfast time in 1987, he was one of the most well-known faces and names in the entire country. So, what happened?
But of course, obviously, the general rule has to be respect the customs of the country you visit, even if you're only there for a few hours.
Well, at first, nothing seemed amiss. Frank had left breakfast time after 4 years as lead presenter so that he could take over the long-running holiday programme, which had been on the air since 1969. A keen holidaymaker himself, this seemed like an ideal job for Frank to take up as he was nearing his 60s. However, the very next year, in 1988, a story would break that would sour the clean-cut reputation that Frank had built up over 25 years, and also shock the millions of viewers who had been watching him for just as long. In late May, the front page of the infamous dish rag, The News of the World, led with the following words: "Frank Bough, I took drugs with Vice Girls." This was not a sentence anyone in a million years would have attributed to Frank, always viewed as the straight-talking family man. But as readers dug further into this audacious article, the revelations only grew more stark. It was reported that Frank frequently had attended parties involving prostitutes, who he claimed introduced him to various Class A drugs, including cocaine. Rather than bury his head in the sand, Frank chose to confront these reports head-on. Whether that was the right decision or not, I'll leave up to you. He told the paper, "I'm not a wicked man, nor do I mean any harm or evil to people. I've made mistakes, but everyone is entitled to do that. No one's suffered but my wife, my family, and myself. It was a brief but appalling period in my life. Don't condemn my entire career for a brief episode I regret." A fair statement, some would say. Frank appeared remorseful, regretful, not denying what had been said about him, but owning it, with the hope of forgiveness, and to move on. His aforementioned wife, Nesta, whom he'd been married to for nearly 30 years at this point, arguably had all the reasons in the world to walk away. However, she chose to stand by him, and confidently claimed, "I know this won't happen again because of the disgrace this has brought on his family." So, his wife and family stood by him. But what about his employer? The BBC, an institution that Frank had worked for 25 years, had made their decision. Initially, Bough was taking a rest from his duties, But shortly after, the BBC unceremoniously sacked him, without fanfare or much publicity. This was the absolute worst case scenario for Frank, for now he was like many a budding presenter, out of a job and looking for work. It wouldn't be long before he'd find it. Despite the scandal, broadcasters still valued the experience that Frank could bring to television, especially live programming.
That's a great outline, isn't it? Shall I stop there? You can't better than that, can you?
Serious or quirky, it's always compelling. The FBI, weeknights at 8:30 on Sky News.
In 1989, he joined Sky News to present the Frank Bough interview programme. Later that same year, he would join London Weekend Television, a franchise of the ITV network, to lead 6 o'clock live. And in the summer of 1991, he would return to the world of sport to present ITV's coverage of the Rugby World Cup tournament. It seemed that Frank's fortunes were on the up. After a devastating scandal, he was able to come back to broadcasting and attempt to showcase that his talents far outweighed any personal misadventures. But in the summer of 1992, Frank's world would come crashing down around him once again. Another paper would be the architect of Frank's unwanted time in the spotlight. This time it was the Sunday Mirror. The headline read, "Sex Slave Bough's Den of Evil," arguably even more lurid than what had been plastered on the front pages in 1988. Frank was found leaving the flat ran by a Miss Charlotte, a rubber-clad dominatrix. This flat was the scene of a reported sadomasochistic orgy dungeon to which Frank reportedly took part. When confronted by the Sunday Mirror's journalist at his home later on, Frank pleaded, "I've been through all this before. I may never work again if this story is published." Unfortunately for Frank, it was.
At the time, we were thinking, maybe rock and roll, maybe movie stars. That was the hedonistic, mad lifestyle. No, it was fluffy jumper-wearing Frank who was a wild and crazy party animal. And it's still, when I think about it, it still doesn't quite compute.
Once again, Frank chose to confront the problem publicly and head-on, for better or for worse. In a TV interview shortly after the story broke, he had this to say: "Everybody, when they have difficulties with their marriage or sexuality, surely has the right to sort out these things in the privacy of their own home." Under some modern views, some would definitely agree with him. Listen, I'm not here to kink shame. Whatever Frank or anyone chooses to get up to in their private life, provided it's legal and consensual between all parties and not outwardly harming anyone else, then sure, go for it. That doesn't take away from the fact that Frank kept all of this from his wife and his family, rightly describing his actions as exceedingly stupid, especially given the first wave of reports regarding him back in 1988. Nesta, amazingly, continued to stand by him, despite being very hurt and very angry.
Well, I'm feeling exceedingly stupid. I mean, I have been exceedingly stupid, and I accept that. And I bitterly regret many of the things I've done in my life, and if I could only undo them, then I would. And I can hear people saying, well, why didn't you think of that at the time? Oh, that I had thought of that at the time.
In regards to his career, Frank had been able to weather this storm before. Surely he would do so again, right? Well, yes, but arguably not to the same extent. After losing his job on LWT 6 o'clock live due to it being axed around the same time that the scandal broke, Frank was once again out of a job. Despite not being on TV as a presenter, he would be discussed frequently on satirical programmes, such as the BBC's Have I Got News For You. Angus Dayton, one of the main hosts, was the main candidate for ripping into Frank's escapades, and would do so even when Frank himself made a guest appearance on the programme. What convinced him to do that is anyone's guess. Ironically, Dayton would ultimately be sacked from the show, due to his own use of cocaine and prostitutes. Funny how the world works like that sometimes, isn't it?
To go to all that kind of effort is just unbelievable.
Frank, on the other hand, would move into radio, presenting a show for LBC in London through the 90s. His holidaying exploits came to the fore as well when he presented Travel Life for the aptly named cable channel Travel. But as the world entered the new millennium, Frank gradually wound down his presenting work, before entering retirement, ending a long, glorious career, but one forever tarred by the blotches of scandal.
And then it was a time that decade when you could get people to say, wow, look at that, you know, because suddenly we had colour. I mean, can you imagine black and white? And people said, wow, colour.
Frank would pop up every now and then, sometimes in retrospective programmes, such as looking back at shows like Nationwide or Grandstand. As time wore on, it seems that public opinion towards the presenter mellowed out, even though Frank was barely on the telly anymore. On the 21st of October, 2020, Frank Bough would pass away in a care home at the age of 87. And if you switched on BBC News shortly afterwards, you'd be met with the following tribute.
Frank Bough, one of the most familiar faces on BBC television for many years, has died at the age of 87.
The private and the public Frank Bough may have been rather different, but his long career was a testament to his skill and ease in front of a live TV camera. David Soletto, BBC News.
Watching this, the parts of Frank's life that are covered are absolutely the ones that you'd expect, highlighting his work over the decades he spent at the BBC, whilst also touching on the moments that ground that work to a screeching halt. Ultimately, though, it remains a comprehensive yet heartfelt tribute to a man who for many decades was arguably not only the BBC's top presenter, but the most well-known face on British television.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you. I'm losing control of this programme.
Well, that was the delightful Legs & Co. performing down in the videotape area. And for our final message, because of an industrial dispute, this recording is taking place in the Nationwide studio. But from all of us in Sports Department, we'd like to wish our very good friends in videotape, those magicians who save our bacon week in, week out, a very warm greeting from all of us, a very happy Christmas and a good New Year. God bless you all.
To round off, the story of Frank Bough is complicated. I think we've gathered that much. Was he a brilliant presenter? Absolutely unflappable, as many called him? Yes, for sure. In the history of British broadcasting, there's only a few names you could choose to rival that professionalism, that calm, and yet direct nature that Frank Bough presented to viewers. Yet it's the two scandalous revelations that continue to crop up and blight that work. Now, as a public figure, Frank absolutely did have a responsibility, both to the BBC and to himself and his family, to not get involved in situations like this, never mind caught out. Did the BBC make the right call in sacking him? That was and still is up for debate, and would be even more so nowadays in our world of quickfire cancel culture.
I think the reason Frank Bough had to go, and he had to go in 88, and he would have had to go last year, was because he lied. He didn't just lie to the public and his missus. What he lied to was the bosses. He said, I'm done, I'm sorted out. He probably went into the 80s equivalent of the Priory. It's all sorted. No more cocaine, no more dressing as a schoolboy, no more being smacked on the arse. Bluff Frank Bough caught out again. He had to go, because the one thing you can't do in this business is make fools of your bosses.
Once again, whatever Frank was into and got up to in his own private time, provided it was all consensual and legal, minus the drugs, and that he wasn't hurting anyone, then whatever, it's a free country. But let there be no doubt that his actions did cause hurt to the people that mattered the most, his wife and his children. It does make you wonder that if these same scandals happened today, whether the BBC would have acted as swiftly as they did back in 1988, and what the public sentiments would have been like now. The corporation has sadly been all too familiar with various scandals involving its presenters over the last few years, with arguably a lot more serious charges and allegations than the ones that were levied against Frank. But scandals and personal gripes aside, Frank Bough was and remains one of the most recognisable and respected faces in British broadcasting history. A man who equally famous host Michael Parkinson once said the following about: "If my life depended on the smooth handling of a TV show, he'd be the one that I'd want in charge." And it was that view of Frank that helped him earn his place amongst the best of the BBC's broadcasters.
But Frank Bough, the BBC frontman, became a distant memory. There were more tabloid stories, and eventually the work dried up. A sad end for a master of live television.
Golf, ice hockey and a full day's racing, football, volleyball and paper chasing. We'll be trailing, ocean sailing, then trawling fishermen a film on whaling. We're starting with a sporting fixture, played at Wembley was quite a mixture. Oh, what a game, everybody came, everybody you can name. Charlie, George and Terry Venables and Francis Lee. David Broom and Henry Cooper with his friend Ali. Mark was there and Fritty Paulie was the referee at the sporting event of the year. Lester Pickett riding Martyn Peters, beat Prince Philip in 1,000 metres. Eddie Waring, long past caring, took it up and under and he lost his bearing. Mick McManus with a forearm knockdown, caught Mike Shannon while he had one sock down. What a scene when Billie Jean started up at love 15. Georgie Best and Tommy Docherty had come to blows. Harvey Smith fell off his horse and as he burst his nose, he raised one arm and indicated he would like to goes at the sporting event of the year. Fiery Freddy Truman, Boulder Bumper, Bounce and Disappear, and Moore's Jumper. Stopped by Amos, he said, "Stay, Miss Sheila, Johnny, will you tell me what your game is?" Thorman had to set a Tony Jacklin. Put that putter down, it's unfair tackling. Alan Clark, just for a lark, Martin, can you leave the park? Archie Gebel, Alan Ball, and Colin Bell were there. Both Sir Alf and Brian Clough, well, you could tell were there. Ginny Wade and even Goolagong as well were there at the sporting event to which everyone went for the sporting event of the year.
Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Ethan Carberry-Holt, AJ Mac 200017, Jen, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Tim Ripley, 40-something Manchild, Mr. J. McLeod, James Wallace, Ben, Stephen Oliver, Shadowfiend 180X, Adam Gamer, Sir Fonzie Daz, Matthew Elif, Pigeon's House, Seraphit Euphoria, Dave Batten, Kevin Mallon, Shah H, Liam Turner, Real Team Foxy Plays, Jenny T, Lovely Dave and Gem, NJ on DT84, Jimmy the Bantam, Robert Wallace, Paul Harper, Michael Kennedy, and Paul Conway are AMTV staff members.